I'm here with Rachel Birkhahn-Rommelfanger, a delegate of the Northern Illinois Conference. She's a young adult and a student at Wesley Seminary. And I've asked her to sit and talk with me today about issues related to the future of the church and in particular General Conference. So thank you, Rachel, for agreeing to sit down and chat with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Rachel, a lot of people say that young people are past issues of race and racism, that that's not an issue that they deal with anymore. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that young people are less prejudiced overtly. So we have a lot more interracial dating, we have a lot more friends that are different races than us, but I don't think that the systems of racism are gone from our society or have stopped affecting us as individuals. So I still think that white people have greater access to education, and there's still a lot of prejudice in our legal system that targets people of color differently than white people. And so I think those larger systemic elements of racism are still present. And young people are aware of them, but it's less of that overt bigotry that's being expressed by my generation as generations before.
So when people say we don't need to have these conversations related to the future of the church, you would disagree with that?
I think we need to have these sort of conversations even more, because even though we're connecting across different racial lines and we're hanging out with people that are different than us, that means we need to talk about the system of injustice that is still making some of those conversations unequal, that's still putting some people into power differently. So one example that I can think of is my grandfather served in World War II, and he had access to the GI Bill. And because of that, he was able to go to college and buy a home and change his socioeconomic standing. But many African Americans or Native Americans that did serve were not given equal access to those same services when they returned home. And so that's left some structural inequality in our society. And as a church, we need to talk about that, for how these things have impacted us as a United Methodist Church and created a system even now that many of our African American brothers and sisters left and formed other denominations that are very similar but are not the same. And that impacts membership and participation in the church at large, and kind of leaves it being a more white-dominated group. And that's because of our history. So we have to keep having that conversation, even as the overt bigotry and prejudice among individuals has decreased.
So many of the conversations about change in the church and the church needs to change are based in this call for relevance, that we need to be more relevant as a church. What do you think makes the church relevant, or will make the church relevant, and what will it take for us to get there?
I think of relevance as being about adaptability and the ability to change and see what the people in your community need. And I think also to be relevant to young people, you make sure they're included in the conversation. People are ready to step up and talk about their visions and their dreams for the church, but they need to be asked. And so that relevancy comes with engaging people, a more collaborative, non-hierarchical model, and being flexible, ability to switch your plans halfway through and say, people actually don't like this, we need to try something new over here. And the more nimble we can be, the more relevant we'll be.
What will it take for us to get there, to be that type of nimble church that engages people in new ways?
I think we need to set up structures and systems that allow for change. So they can't be too large and bulky. Sort of like in government class, we talk about decentralization versus centralization. If everything's too centralized, you actually move slower because you're large and bulky and you have a lot of bureaucracy that you have to go through. But sometimes if you can be more decentralized, you're able to change and adapt and see what's coming at you and talk with people differently. So I think for the church, it's about looking at what we have and seeing what's working effectively and what's not, and trying to cut out some of our bureaucracy, but also not coming so tightly together that we're going to be so small and so that we don't have the people and the ability to see where the changes are coming from and the new creative ideas. It requires a lot of people, a lot of input to be that nimble, and it requires different perspectives from those people and different people on the ground doing different things so that they can say, hey, we need to change that. But if you're all in one place, it's going to break down some of that ability to be relevant and adapt very quickly.
What do you think and what do you hear other young people saying about what their hopes for the church are?
I'll take a moment to get political. When I look at the call to action and some of those things, people say all kinds of different things to me. But I've heard we should have more boards and agencies, more things so that we can be more places doing more national work. And then I hear from some people that they're just unsure if this is the right kind of change that we need. But I definitely hear that the death language, that our church is dying, our church is declining, doesn't match the reality of all young people. Some of them are shocked to hear people say that we're dying, as if they're not already there, already present, part of something new that's happening. I like to think of it as things are changing, and it's going to be something new. And sometimes for the newness to come, the change to happen, we need to have a little bit of death, like around Easter. For us to have the rebirth and the new life, we have to change what we are now and rise again as something completely different. And I think that young people are hoping that we will change and adapt to be something new in this new world that holds those values of justice and community and a safe place that lives out the gospel to serve others.
There are lots of opinions, lots of folks who have different ideological beliefs. There's some polarization between progressives and conservatives and moderates, that sort of thing. How do you think that we can have conversations with people who have different opinions, and particularly around the issues of justice, who don't feel that that's a center point of the church? What is the message? How do we communicate with them?
So I think the first thing is to make sure that there's a space to say, well, what do you think? And why is that important to you? What in your past, in your experience says that the way you think that we're moving in the church is the best way? But then I also think about using stories from our lives, talking about why justice is important to us is important as well. Something I commonly hear around racial justice is, why do we need to have a Black History Month? Why are we spending all this time working on all these different months, honoring all these different people? And one thing that jumps in my mind is, why do we have a 4th of July? Everybody in this country can get really excited and have huge parties to talk about the revolution in America. We can all get behind that. But if I came up to you and was like, why are you celebrating the 4th of July? That's crazy. People would be like, what? It's the 4th of July. Well, that's the same thing when we go up to someone and we're like, why are you celebrating Black History Month? That's something of the past. We don't need these different months, but it's our history. It's our past. And so it's about approaching it from those kind of slightly different angles, of saying to people, well, what do you care about? Well, I actually care about the same sort of thing from a different perspective. And I think that helps our white brothers and sisters come in to take those core values of loving our past and being nostalgic for the way things were, or the values of why we're United Methodist, of what brought you to this church, and asking people to share that story of why do you love this church, and then to share maybe a different narrative. Because one of the reasons I love the United Methodist Church is because of social holiness that John Wesley taught, and his desire to help and serve the world. And that really allows people to connect to the conversation because they have a reason about the values and the truths that the church taught them that they want to share and they want to be heard, especially at General Conference. We all are there because we love the Methodist Church, and we're passionate about seeing the church make good decisions that follow the way we think God is leading us. And so how can we connect why we love God, why we love the church, and what vision we have for that going forward?
And talk a little bit about intergenerational dialogue and how that would help the church, and how we need to engage a bit more in or better in intergenerational dialogue.
It can get hard because sometimes I get very defensive as a young person because there's so many older people, and I feel like they're dominating the conversation or not sure they want to let me in. And so some of it's about asking older people to make space, to invite younger people into the conversation, and for younger people to be open to letting the older people be in the conversation as well, by just asking those questions and trying to find those commonalities and build those relationships.